2+2 बैठक से हमारी रणनीतिक प्राथमिकताओं की दिशा में हमारे दृष्टिकोण को बढ़ावा देने के लिए दोनों ओर से किए जा रहे साझा प्रयासों में मदद मिली है।
We look forward to finalizing the Westinghouse civil nuclear project that will provide clean and reliable power.
COMCASA today will enable India to access advanced technologies from the US and enhance India's defense preparedness.
We will continue working together to enhance and expand India's role as a primary major defense partner.
Yes, India and US held the inaugural 2+2 dialogue today, and it is being claimed as a historic meeting between the defense ministers and foreign ministers of both sides. Defense and strategic ties were clearly the big focus of the first 2+2 dialogue. And after 5 hours of conversation, India and US have signed an agreement on COMCASA, or communications compatibility and security, which will allow real-time secured communications, better utilization of US equipment, and open doors to more high-end defense technology. In a first for India, hotlines will also be set up for defense and external ministers with their US counterparts, and tri-service exercises will also take place later this year. But did India really gain from the inaugural 2+2? No answers yet on issues critical for India, including Iranian oil, the S-400 air defense system from Russia, steel and aluminium tariffs, and also H-1B and H-4 visas. Joining us now to take this further is Alyssa Iris, Senior Fellow for India, Pakistan and South Asia at Council on Foreign Relations. We also have former US Ambassador to India, Tim Romer. We also have former Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal and former US Secretary of State Carlos Guterres for joining us here on the debate. But first of all, I'll go across to Ambassador Tim Romer. Ambassador Tim Romer, a lot is being talked about the COMCASA. Do you think this is really a big achievement? We've been talking about it for the last 10 years. How will this really help India?
Well, listen, I think there are a couple, 2 or 3 very positive signs that we're seeing out of the 2+2 and a couple concerns. First of all, let's look at the positive side, the glass half full. I understand that there was a meeting, even brief, with Mr. Modi. That's a good sign to welcome Mr. Mattis and Mr. Pompeo. I understand that this compatibility and technology security agreement, which we had been working on for over a decade, has finally been solved. And this is a big deal. This helps smooth the exchange of advanced technologies through both our bureaucracy and the Indian bureaucracy, and help our navies in the Indo-Pacific do more. So that's significant and important. And also the discussion about India playing a stronger role in the Indo-Pacific Ocean. We have a lot of interest in that, and so do they. Those are the very positive things initially coming out. My 3 concerns would be, you know, the 2+2 talks were delayed twice, and I would hope the Trump administration wakes up every morning believing, acting on, and implementing the important priority of the U.S.-India relationship and deepening those ties, not simply maintaining them. Secondly, I hope President Trump will accept the Republic Day invitation from Mr. Modi, as President Obama did. It's showing up in foreign policy. It's not just tweets. And thirdly, I saw that President Trump declined to attend the ASEAN meetings coming up, the security and economic meetings with the ASEAN countries this fall. I would hope he might reconsider that, because that's a sign both to India and China about our priorities in Asia.
Okay. All right. Alyssa, if I can come to you, what do you feel about the joint statement that was agreed upon by both sides after the 2+2 dialogue? There were 5 hours of conversation. They discussed the entire strategic and defense partnership.
They did indeed. I had a chance to go over the joint statement. You know, it was interesting to me as somebody, and of course, Ambassador Romer has spent a lot of time working on these joint statements as well on the U.S. side. When I served in the State Department, I worked on the behind-the-scenes aspects of preparing these joint statements. And it was nice to see what came out of this session. It's a very focused set of statements about the areas in which India and the United States will continue to cooperate. I was happy to see a very strong statement of support on continued counterterrorism cooperation, deepening that Navy-to-Navy relationship. The tri-exercises, as you mentioned, this is important. That's really going to deepen this defense partnership. I was also surprised and quite intrigued by the statement which Secretary Pompeo reaffirmed in his remarks, that we would be looking to do more together with India on North Korea. I'll be interested to see how that unfolds, because that has not been an area in which we've cooperated very closely. But overall, I thought this was a quite strong joint statement in what it offered for deepening the security and strategic aspects of U.S.-India ties. I thought it was quite positive.
Okay, and Ambassador Sybil, if I can come to you, do you also feel that this was a time when the U.S. wanted to gauge how much can India cooperate and fall in line with U.S. foreign policy vis-a-vis North Korea, like Alyssa said, vis-a-vis Afghanistan, Iran, the Middle East, and also China and Russia?
I don't think that was the central purpose of this 2+2 dialogue. And if it was the central purpose, then I would say that this kind of a dialogue will not be very productive. Because in any strategic partnership, there has to be a balance of interests. It should not be that U.S. strategic interests overrule India's strategic interests, and therefore the whole exercise becomes a relatively one-sided affair. I don't think that this would be the intention either of Secretary of State Pompeo and particularly of Secretary of State Mattis. The fact that we held this 2+2 dialogue, even if it was delayed, is in itself a very important thing, because it sends a very powerful signal in our region and in Asia in general, that there is now a deepening of understandings both at the diplomatic level and at the defense level between India and the United States, and all around the countries will have to take note of this, because this is not going to be a one-time exercise. As has been mentioned in the joint statement, the next dialogue will take place in the United States next year. It was heavily oriented in terms of deepening the defense relationship, but here again, unless the United States helps in building India's own defense manufacturing base, then I think the advantages that India would want to gain from this exercise would become limited, because if India does not want to remain the biggest importer of arms, and especially advanced American arms, then America must actually involve India in the supply chains of U.S. defense companies, as was mentioned in the joint statement, and help develop a manufacturing base with the DTTI and other agreements that have taken place on sharing of innovation, defense innovation, technologies, etc., etc. So all in all, I think, as I said, it is heavily defense-oriented, but also on the political side, on Afghanistan, the joint statement is not particularly revealing as to what lies in the future. On the Indo-Pacific, the signals have been sent very clearly without naming China, and all the points which have been stressed by both sides about transparency and overflights and freedom of navigation and respect for law, etc., etc. All these will be understood by the countries who are violating this. Now, with regard to COMCASA, that was obviously a very important achievement, but one should not confuse this with a general opening of advanced defense technologies, because this is related to the communication equipment and improving the capability of the equipment that we have got from the United States. But this is but it is an important step in terms of the second foundational agreement that it's a second foundational agreement that has been signed, and now BECA, in due course, perhaps we will be able to discuss and eventually sign. On trade issues, Secretary Pompeo was not aggressive, but
Mr. Sybil, I'll come back
he mentioned all the things that are troubling. Okay, all right.
I'll come back on trade. I just want to pursue the point on defense cooperation further. You spoke about COMCASA. India is also saying that this is an India-specific agreement, only an enabling document. Doesn't mean that we're committing to importing equipment from the United States. Having said that, I'll go across to Mr. Carlos Gutierrez. Defense cooperation has been very important for both sides. How do you see this progressing further in the days, weeks, and months to come?
Well, you know, our relationship 10, 12 years ago was basically non-existent. So since we signed the civil nuclear agreement, our relationship has grown in leaps and bounds. And not just the economic part. We all know that there's $15 billion of sales from the U.S., but I think it's bigger than that. It's the idea of having a strategic partner in Asia, and what that can do to secure maritime routes, to secure trade, and to have a peaceful vicinity. So this is a lot bigger than just the dollars. This is a strategic alliance between two countries.
But Alyssa, if I can talk to you about the misses, do you feel that there is still no clarity on Iranian oil? And that is something very critical for India. The sanctions kick in on the 4th of November, and US is still saying, and I think this was conveyed today, that we can help you if you want to talk about alternatives. We can keep on negotiating, but for the moment, there is no clarity on a waiver.
Well, it does seem that there was no specific decision reached, obviously, during the content of today's talks. These snapback sanctions go back to the way they were prior to the finalization of the Iran deal. And what that means, at least the way it functioned in the Obama administration, was that countries that significantly reduced their purchases of oil from Iran in a 6-month period would receive a waiver of these sanctions. Now, it's possible that the Trump administration will evaluate these things slightly differently. It's hard to tell, but at least the way it used to work is that some measure of a reduction would then be evaluated and offer that exemption from the sanctions. That's what I would anticipate seeing.
Okay, and on the issue of H-1B, India has conveyed that we hope the US will take an objective view on this. Mr. Guterres, if I can ask you, do you see any possibility of a concession? The policy is still under review. I don't think there was any concrete commitment on either H-1B or H-4 visas from the US side.
Well, I would say businesses want the H-1B quotas to increase, not to stay as they are, and definitely not to decrease. We have a shortage of STEM skills in the U.S. We need Indian skills. It would be a detriment to our economy if we were to lower immigration. So I think that's something that in the outcome of the 2+2, they said that they would look at it. The U.S. would take another look at the immigration policy, but we need to understand this is good for the U.S. Immigration from India is high-skilled, and we need that level of engineering and that level of competence in the U.S., which is why we're seeing some companies building R&D centers in Canada. So I hope this is an agreement that's reached soon, and I hope that actually the quotas are taking up.
On that note, we'll take a short break, but when we return, we're going to pursue the point about trade, because India has been very concerned about the aluminium and steel tariffs. We'll discuss that when we're back.